Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video I'm going to discuss the Chancellor Philip Hammond's statement that the UK is going to have no control in the event of a no-deal Brexit. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. That really helps. So Philip Hammond, in an interview, has made the point that far from taking back control, a no-deal Brexit means ceding control, especially to the EU. The specific points he made were related to levers. Now, Brexit is about more than just trade, but trade is the factor that has the most immediate and undeniable impact on most people's lives. Hammond explained that at the Dover-Calais border, for example, we can control inbound movement, but not outbound. The French control movement into Calais, and so the EU, at that port. He likened this to the dialling up and dialling down of queues that Spain already uses to control its border with Gibraltar. France would be able to do likewise at Calais, and indeed would do, and it won't be out of spite. Control at the border is an imperative for EU countries in order to maintain the integrity of the single market. Hammond said that the French would be able to control the queues for goods going into Calais, and so the UK would be at the mercy of President Macron. A man who, let us not forget, has been personally insulted by a number of UK Brexiteers, including Boris Johnson. Of course, the UK currently meets the standards on goods, same standards as the EU, because we're an EU member. But as soon as we leave, and if we do so without a deal, then we won't be legally bound by those standards. Now, those standards are not going to change overnight, but over time they would do. And that would mean checks would need to take place to ensure that only the goods that are meeting the EU standards are allowed through. For example, if we agree the trade deal with the US that Donald Trump wants and our Conservative governments will absolutely give him, all of a sudden our food standards will have dropped down below those safety levels. The EU would no longer have confidence in our food standards. Hammond also mentioned the impact of private businesses. The government can try and encourage private businesses to act in a certain way for the benefit of the UK, but that didn't exactly work out in the wake of the recession. So we can't force them. So both the EU 27 and private businesses control most of the levers of trade in a post-EU Britain. So the government has little control, and even the control it does have comes at a cost. So take that example of border control. Hammond said that we can keep goods flowing inwards. But that's only by not carrying out full checks. Remember our old friend the WTO. In the event of a no-deal Brexit, we can't treat EU countries preferentially because we have no agreement with them. That means if we don't check EU goods, we shouldn't be checking goods from other countries either. Now, we might say that we don't need to check EU goods because we are happy with their standards. We agree with them at the moment. We currently have the same standards. But that wouldn't be the same for other countries. So we'd be risking allowing prohibited goods or goods below a certain standard of safety into the country in order to keep traffic flowing at our borders, because if we didn't, we'd be in breach of WTO rules. And this is because to put the necessary checks in place to check EU goods to the same standard we do others, we'd need to expand our border capacity by literally 100-fold. At the moment, we have 1% of the necessary capacity. But we haven't expanded at all, certainly not 100-fold. For all the talk of no-deal planning, it was always done with the belief that no deal will never actually happen. This is why the UK hasn't really prepared at all, but the EU has. The EU can't control whether or not we leave without a deal, so they had to take it seriously. We can. We didn't believe we would leave without a deal, so we haven't taken it seriously. Hammond had already warned Boris Johnson last month that his Brexit plans were in direct contradiction to reality, or what he termed immutable truths. He also challenged him, as well as the other leadership contenders at the time, to say what their plan B was, because the money they are claiming to be able to use to smooth things over doesn't actually exist, and it's not going to exist if we leave without a deal. For example, Jeremy Hunt was talking about spending money to compensate business owners who will be screwed over by a no deal. But that money isn't going to be there, as a no deal will more than swallow it up. So how did we get here? Well, let's remind ourselves of what the control over trade was supposed to be back before the referendum in 2016. So all Brexiteers, from Farage to Rees-Mogg, were saying that we would have full access to the single market, but also full control over our trade negotiations with other countries. They likened the future to being like Switzerland or Norway. Why can't we be like them, who have access to the single market but are not EU members? This is what Brexit meant, and it's what people voting to leave voted for. Of course, the problem is that neither Switzerland nor Norway have the sort of control over their trade relationships that the Brexiteers were claiming. So this vision of Brexit was legally and politically impossible to achieve. It didn't actually exist in the way they said it did. This is why as soon as the referendum was won and the process triggered, they slowly shifted the meaning of Brexit. They changed it from full access to the single market, all our current benefits with the EU with none of the responsibilities, to no links at all with the EU on any level, whether it be trade, security, travel, citizens' rights, though they were less opposed to that last one. But of course, we rely upon trade with our EU partners. We rely upon cooperation for security purposes with our EU partners. But, you know, that trade is super important for everything from food to medicines. But in the event of a no-deal Brexit, we haven't the systems in place to carry out the currently smooth trade that we now enjoy. We behaved with an attitude that the world is desperate to trade with this rain-soaked island, that people were so desperate to trade with us that they would break their own laws, and to do so, they were convinced that the business leaders in the EU would be barracking their politicians to give us the trade deal without us having to accept any responsibility at all. But this didn't happen. EU business leaders have been saying that the single market is more important than UK trade. After all, trade with the largest free trade area in the world is a much greater share of their business than that with the UK alone. In fact, the Brexiteer position has hardened even more in the past few months, whereby it's not enough to simply leave the EU without any ties at all, whether for trade, rights, security or travel. No, they're saying that we should now even refuse to pay what we owe. Now, if the new Prime Minister was reckless enough to think that not paying the 39 billion or whatever it ends up being, then that really will be a no-deal Brexit. At that point, the EU will break off all lines of communication. There will be no negotiations to use it as a bargaining chip in until it is paid. So every action that the Brexiteers say will be an example of us taking back control will in reality be an example of us losing control in the most humiliating manner possible. And how could it be otherwise? Because the whole EU as a collective compared to the UK has a greater population. It has a greater economy, greater spending power, greater military might when it comes to that, greater political might. How on earth would a UK on its own ever hope to compete? So I hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link to check out the exclusives for patrons. And until next time, I'll see you later.